This is Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on Ground Zero and across the globe.
The stories from Ground Zero, Ambazonia, are both tantalizing and traumatizing. Lambert, Mbom.
As we all enter the dog-eat-dog phase of our revolution, how about judging fellow citizens by their works rather than just their names? This is Sylvester Makia.
This is Maminga. All of you people have been called by the country heads to come and talk. Have a dialogue with them. That conference is going to hold whether you like it or you don't.
Manga, Nami Pache, the IG, if it been a wrong thing, if it been a mafia, I will not go build that country on top mafia.
While others were advocating for freedom by any means necessary, including violence, Martin Luther King Jr. used the power of words and acts of non-violent resistance to achieve seemingly impossible goals. Today is Ambazonia's day to prove the same. This is Tani Jude Agua Ozuge.
These are the battles Ambazonians must prepare to have once the guns go silent and a safe window opens for mass, peaceful mobilization. It is Ambazonia's winning strategy. This is Delano Mukong.
The death toll of innocent victims continues to rise in Ambazonia at the hands of Bia's genocidal forces. I am Innocent-Chia.
Crocodile tears will continue to flow. Tata-Mentan for Ambazonia Calling.
Washington's men were undersupplied. Many marched in the snow without shoes. So it is with the Amba Boys and the people of Ambazonia. My name is Jeff McCoy. I'm one of the producers of the Ambazonia Calling Show.
Welcome to Ambazonia Calling. It is the day before the Martin Luther King holiday here in the United States, a celebration of nonviolence and achievements in civil liberties. It is 2 days before the court case opens before the High Court in Abuja, Nigeria, against the government of Cameroon and the government of Nigeria, asking them to produce Siseko Ayuktabe and his aides who were abducted from Nigeria and rendition to Cameroon. It is 5 days before the 26th of January when citizens of next door, La République du Cameroun, have sworn they are moving their revolution forward with street demonstrations. It is 3 days since 3 farmers returning from their farm in Bongé County in the southern zone were murdered by B officers driving by. It is also 2 days after a young man was pursued into the home of his parents, given he could not escape from the marauding soldiers of La République du Cameroun, and killed right there. Here to open our program is Lambert Mbom with our editorial for the week.
The stories from Ground Zero, Ambazonia, are both tantalizing and traumatizing. The people of Ambazonia are restive, caught between the rock and the hard place. Many are heard questioning, how did we get here in the first place? We have scored many victories and won many battles, and so the most obvious question is, what next? In 2017, there was a roadmap designed from the US and widely circulated, but before it could be implemented, it was hijacked and railroaded by conclaves in Nigeria. Ambazonians must never lose sight of the significance of Nigeria. It has been our worst nightmare. The 4 conclaves that took place there dealt lethal blows to our liberation struggle. We seemingly have not learned the lessons and are instead doubling down, trying to sanitize the mess of these conclaves. We cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. The civil rights legend Martin Luther King Jr., whose legacy Americans celebrate tomorrow, cautioned that we are not makers of history. We are made by history. 2018 brought forth many unanticipated challenges, complicating the restoration journey. Yes, liberation journeys are messy, but failing to plan adequately is planning to fail woefully. 2019 is off to a rocky start because the phenomenon of strong men has gripped the struggle. Next month, there are 2 conclaves scheduled both in the United States of America. One organized by the Interim Government Group, scheduled for February 28th through March 3rd, 2019 in Philadelphia, named Ambazonia People's National Convention, and the other dubbed All Southern Cameroon's People's General Conference on February 22nd and February 23rd, 2019 in Washington, D.C. Never mind that a similar conference just took place in Boston last December 2018. Surrogates of both conferences have gone on the offensive, and the Mbolombolo dance continues, much to our amusement and chagrin. Ambazonians, we are only deceiving ourselves and shall have ourselves only to blame. Many are flirting with the strongman syndrome and are classical turncoats instead of standing tall on principles. Take the issue of elections, which some Ambazonians vehemently condemned and have so comfortably made excuses, only to turn around and start asking for counties to elect leaders and then to convene in the City of Brotherly Law, Philadelphia, to select and crown their leader. Elections may not be a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary condition for us to nudge this revolution to the finish line. Imagine how far we would have gone with this struggle if we had taken advantage of the proposal on October 1st, 2017 to confirm the selection of Seseko Ayuktabe as president of the interim government group. We have lost 14 months, and even next February, the outcomes of the attempt to outsmart others by convening supposedly elected county leaders is a charade at best. Reflecting on the current state of the Ambazonia revolution, the words of Dr. King to the 1959 graduating class of Morehouse College remain relevant, and I quote, "The great challenge facing every member of this graduating class is to remain awake, alert, and creative through this great revolution." End of quote. This is and should be the abiding message to every Ambazonian. This is the Martin Luther King Jr. challenge to every Ambazonian. We must remain awake and alert to the subterfuges designed not just by the Biya regime, but also by his collabos even amongst us. We must be creative and design a roadmap which synchronizes programs with other stakeholders of our revolution, avoids duplication and waste, and above all, it must be smart. That is, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. We cannot afford to continue running the revolution on an ad hoc basis, availing of short-term solutions to long-lasting problems, running helter-skelter with fire extinguishers in hand, being reactionary and not proactive. Lambert Mbom, Ambazonia Calling.
Still ahead in this edition, we have The Devil Unmasked with Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. We have a winner of the Nyamfuka of the Week. And we are not done until you have heard our letter to Joshua. So stay tuned, kick back, relax, and enjoy Ambazonia Calling. Let me welcome Innocent with the first part of our news wrap-up for the week.
We are not still 3 months away. We are not still all the Republic Inter come again. No. Then I wouldn't get it to now. Maybe now we get an no. That's good. That means they would already move them. It remain a small band with them. Small time we will move to the band with them. send the ad where United Nations nobody independent.
Ambazonia Calling has learned that Cameroon's infamous elite military forces, otherwise known as BOYO, are currently adopting a new strategy to paint a different picture of the conflict between La République du Cameroon and Ambazonia that continues to attract a lot of international attention.
Cameroon must bow. Cameroon must bow. And the objective is that every government office must close. We don't care whether that ends to an office on basic education. Only church. People are free to go to the church. Only hospitals, banks open. The rest must close down because there is war. The real one is coming. The real one. And those in Victoria, take note. You have tried to manipulate your way around. This time around, you will not go free. Victoria, take note. My phone is not included because my phone is behaving. Those in mainland Victoria, take note. What is coming ahead in Ambazonia will be more than 666. Yes, because when the trumpet will sound, Ganzo will shake. They show me something. I see. Hey, I don't know. Make an act Congo, sir. Nah, no, tell me. No man not tell me anything. But I just say, stop your horns before 1st of February.
The use of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, will be amplified between now and February 15th, we learned, while burnings will be reduced. Explosive devices will be planted in major areas across southern Cameroon, including areas to be visited by the United Nations Commission for Human Rights and other agencies. Watch out for massive killing of children on February 11th, as the government of Cameroon has been sending medical vans and ambulances that will stage an emergency response on the 11th of February after explosions are recorded in these vulnerable areas. Following reports on the burning of human beings and houses made by UN agencies currently on the ground on humanitarian purposes, the military headquarters adopted the strategy and time frame in order to change the narrative and blame restoration forces.
I was very quick to realize that if we allowed people to go on the streets in a dispersed manner, it would be difficult for government to address the collective problems of the people. So I came up with the concept of the consortium, and felt that if everybody invested their power in the consortium, it will be easy for us to be able to canalize our grievances and have them addressed in a concerted manner.
Dr. Ntumfoyn, the brain and architect behind the formation of the consortium of trade union, teachers, lawyers, and other civil organizations that formed a united front to press demands for a change in Cameroon in 2016, has made his most forthright pronouncement on where he stands on the federation versus independence question.
I have been an activist from childhood, and I have been a crusader. I have stood up against injustice everywhere it showed its head, because I believe that once injustice is allowed to thrive, then no one is safe.
Speaking in an exclusive Facebook Live interview with activist Eugene Ufoka, Dr. Fontem was without equivocation about standing with the people, wherever the people stand on the question, following due consultation, education, and a referendum.
We need to look for a way of doing things that is more sustainable and do it as fast as possible, and to bring the world to our doorsteps, to listen to us and to act on what we want. And that is what I fear we are not doing.
Dr. Fontem is currently in the United States, where he has reportedly been talking with highly relevant organizations and knocking on important doors that have made commitments to participate in the broad-based All Southern Cameroonians People's General Conference that is built a month out on February 22nd and 23rd in Washington, D.C. Questions abound in many minds about funding for the conference and Dr. Fontem's motives. He clarified on most of these questions during the interview, making clear that this conference is different in determining a way forward for Southern Cameroons, beginning by uniting fractious factions on common grounds.
Some people talk from experience. Others from experience don't talk. And so I I felt that it was necessary to watch and see the direction of things. I felt that at some point things were being properly done. So there is no point for everybody to talk at the same time, because when everybody is talking at the same time, it becomes noise. Repeating the same thing over and over doesn't serve any purpose. And that is essentially what happened, until I was able to begin to notice that things were going out of hand. Too much infighting had set in, and that we were gradually derailing from our objective and from our course. The people were no longer the focus, and the focus was now on individuals, their egos, and other personal issues that did not have anything to do with what the average Southern Cameroonians aspires to. And so it was necessary for me to make a point.
A hunger strike has reportedly been called off by the over 100 Ambazonians in the holding dungeons of SED in Yaoundé, capital of La République du Cameroon. Reliable sources confirmed that going into the third day of the hunger strike that started on Monday and following revelations by Ambazonia Calling last weekend on the ongoing torture of Ambazonians in the sealed-off and hidden dungeons at the SED, authorities promised to transfer the prisoners of conscience and war to the DONGA-MANTUNG security prison by the end of January 2019 if they would call off the strike. The Communications Department of Ambazonia Defense Forces has called on the population around Chisson, Melef, and Kulumbo to take necessary security precautions and get out of harm's way. The Tuesday warning followed renewed and intense fighting in the state of Bui, northern zone between Colonial La République du Cameroon Genocidal Forces and Ambazonia Defense Forces, ADF. According to account by ADF, 5 genocidal forces of La République du Cameroon reportedly lost their lives and several others incurred life-threatening injuries as the ADF maintains its guerrilla posture of making the land ungovernable. Meantime, the death toll of innocent victims continues to rise in Ambazonia at the hands of Bia's genocidal forces. A Chisson Catholic hospital nurse, Onela MANYU, native on Saw in Bui State, has died from gunshot wounds at the Bansor Baptist Hospital. She was shot by Bia genocidal forces in the locality of Mve while on her way to work. She died minutes later after bystanders successfully transported her to Bansor Baptist Hospital. Unconfirmed reports say she was pregnant at the time of death. You are listening to Ambazonia Calling, your space for educated news analysis, informed opinions, and commentary towards the recognition of a free, independent Ambazonia. I am NTUMFOYN. Stay with us.
Restoration train is going to the mountains. Restoration train is going to Bamenda. Restoration train is going on to BOYO on the restoration journey of our liberty. Restoration train is moving very steadily. Restoration train is hooting very loudly. Restoration train to carry everybody on the restoration journey of our liberty.
As all of you will remember, the case Ambazonia versus La République du Cameroun, the case in which Nigeria and Cameroon are being asked to produce Sesekwa Yuktabe and his aides, that case goes before the Abuja High Court on Tuesday. And as you know, experts are calling it an interesting case. It is one in which both governments have embarrassed themselves, have violated international law, and law experts are saying, just to describe it very mildly, it is a very interesting case.
The case in Nigeria, it's a very interesting one because it's only showing how incriminating the government of Nigeria and Cameroon have put themselves in a dilemma. It is not only the case in Nigeria, there's another one in Banjul against the Cameroon government. So the two countries are in a mess. they're in a mess because Cameroon government may have no choice but to repatriate them to Nigeria because the Nigerian government have been asking them behind the corridors to send those people back. It has been a great scandal to an embarrassment to the government of Nigeria and its people. So they have been trying their best that these people should be sent back because Nigeria had tarnished its reputation internationally as well as Cameroon. So even the case in Yaoundé, they're just trying to beat about the bush because they know it had tarnished them terribly internationally. So it's a good case. It's a good case because the Nigerian government have to produce these people in court. So let's keep our fingers crossed and see what happens because it's an international affair, and the international body is watching. The case in Yaoundé can go nowhere because those people have said they are not Cameroonians. Now it's a civil court that have to ascertain their nationality. So there is just no way they can keep taking them to a military court. So I mean, let's keep our fingers crossed and see what happens. It's an interesting case though.
This thing will go on for 50 and 100 years. You cannot kill everybody. And even if you kill everybody, the stones would avenge for the blood that spills on them. The soil will get up and start fighting.
You have plenty of show yet to come, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The people of West Cameroon cannot be your slaves. The people of West Cameroon are not. You did not conquer them in war. The problem we have in West Cameroon is the problem that will bring down Cameroon. When people have had pent-up anger and pain, humiliation, for over 50 years, when it bursts out, you will never be able to control it.
They will sooner realize that the people of Ambazonia will not surrender. They will sooner realize that you can arrest and kill, but the more you arrest and kill, the more you energize the people's spirit.
As you may know, two factions of the interim government group are at each other's throats over conclaves, who is convening what meeting in the month of February. And there's an interesting social media debate out there between Mangang on the one hand defending the conclaves at which apparently some fear within the interim government group they will get overthrown, and a place where Mangang says everything will be sorted out as before. But there's one person who doesn't agree, and that's Pache. And he says, not so fast, Mangang. We'll hear Mangang, and it will be followed directly by Pache.
This is Mamingang. The history of the last 4 conclaves that we had was that each time we came upon a difficulty that was weighing down on the revolution, they called for a conclave, and we went, and in our way, whether it was the best way or not, we kind of resolved it and then galvanized new energy under the new structure or new resolutions, and then moved forward. Then they caught Siseko and Co. There was supposed to have been a 5th conclave then, but there was not, because unfortunately for our revolution, we came up with a zigzag way of choosing a leader going forward. From there, they kind of hijacked this revolution, because the procedure that they chose, Sako, was not authentic, never was approved, but it nonetheless, like they say, it was the country heads that did them. But once they did it, what did Sako do? He did a poor beer on us. Eliminated everybody who did change people and became a president for life. Why are we talking the truth here? What is wrong with us? We will never get that democracy that we intend to get, because we are not honest people. We are not. The internal government right now is talking about how they need to stay on, otherwise Seseko, they won't have a chance in their judgment. No. Seseko, they will only have a chance if Ground Zero is giving La Republic hell. And Ground Zero cannot give La Republic hell if we are not getting money from our people. Sako, Anu, all of you people have been called by the country heads to come and talk. Have a dialogue with them. See what the issue is. That conference is going to hold whether you like it or you don't. And recommendations are going to be made. Whether the recommendation is that let's form another entity that will collect money and then advertise that for our people to see, or is be that get rid of Sako and Anu, they will make the recommendations. You people who go out and threaten people, you threaten people about killing them, you don't even have a single army on the ground. You stupid. Nobody's afraid of those threats. If we're not afraid of Pobia and we're giving hell, you think we'll be afraid of somebody sitting in England or sitting somewhere else and making noise over who they're going to kill because of wanting to maintain the IG for Sako? Are you guys crazy? We are going to have the conclave. Everybody is being invited, and I know that for a fact.
Mangang, you wrong. Mangang, you don't lie. You don't wrong plenty, Mangang. This one are really balok where you don't bring an also. Mangang, they know the arranged marriage where picking them with Bele. If some man don't get a picking Bele, you know we arranged marriage where that Bele they never born am. Yes, Mangang, Nami Pache, I want to tell you. Say all that kind of politics where you do the push them ahead. Say me would the go continue for the die. The IG, it be been a wrong thing. It be been a mafia. And we not go build that country on top mafia. Mangang, Mangang, Mangang. No bring balok. No support lie. No support them. Now balok that way you don't talk. Now balok talk that. There is no unity in that latrine system. That latrine system where they copy them from La Republique. For can sideline some leader them. For create something where they call and say IG na mafia. If we don't tire IG, come out clear. Say it was a mistake. Apologize to Ambazonians. And then we look for a way forward. You know, go make them na koni. You go push on politically. It will not work. This is a revolution. You know, go push that type of unity for people their head. Mangang. That is wrong. That is satanic. That is devilish. That is anti-Ambazonian.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people. Sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in BOYO. Here is Innocent with the second part of our news wrap-up for the week.
La République du Cameroon genocidal forces raided a deserted camp belonging to Ambazonian Restoration Forces Thursday.
You begin the so they don't sacrifice a blood. No government, no they pay them. If we brought them and we see that for Europe, we talk say that they give them something alive. They know they give them no nothing. Now when I defeat them. Now when I defeat we know they receive no 5 francs from Europe. Yeah, the day when they play their own politics. The day when they do the fighting. We go do the fighting, we go arrest people leader them. Maybe they roll we. Even if the fight continue for 10 years, they go do their politics for Europe.
Lots of Dane guns and fetishes were found, clear signs that defense forces not only had credible intelligence, but have also evolved in terms of the quality of firepower they possess.
I think they boost when I say we don't really go at least 80% of this fight. We don't really go 80%.
A video gone viral on social media captures Amber boys displaying some sophisticated self-defense weapons at one of several camps.
Now the one spirit, this was Sawana for all them. Yeah, I hear you. Asawana,
Wana,
Asawana,
Wana,
Abagua,
Bua,
Isimina,
Sia,
Gasmaga.
Carry
you go war front. Any man want pick you for down when you be na your brother shoot you back.
Mass exodus is reportedly unfolding in Ndu, a town in DONGA-MANTUNG state, Ambazonia's northern zone. A video on social media platforms shows empty shops, broken doors and windows, reportedly the work of the invading military of La République du Cameroon that has been looting homes and ransacking businesses, taking away food items and electronics for personal keeps. The footage was shot Monday 14th by an unidentified resident. Ndu joins the list of over 190 communities that have been burned down or completely destroyed by Biya's forces of neutralization. Video of a purportedly captured Amber fighter who may be releasing vital strategic information has surfaced on social media platforms. The shirtless man looks badly wounded on the face or has applied camouflage to make believe that he is talking because of torture. In addition to the forces of La République du Cameroon interrogating him, there are two witnesses, supposedly from Cambe, making clear in the video that Cambe distances itself from the rest of Ambazonia in any armed solution to the conflict. Unconfirmed reports allege highway armed robbery by soldiers of La République du Cameroon at an abandoned weigh-in station around Bunji, Batibo in Ambazonia's northern zone. According to reporting by Cameroon News Agency, the occupying army is asking for 50,000 francs, $100 per driver. Drivers who do not cough up the money, a driver told CNA, are asked to park their trucks, catch a ride in another car to Bamenda, then return with the ransom. And finally, in foreign news, several militants of the anti-Sardina campaign, mostly pro-Camto supporters from across Europe and the United States of America, convened last week, January 12th and 13th, in Berlin, Germany. Among key resolutions arrived at the end of the two-day meeting, delegates resolved to support the just Ambazonian cause in whatever way necessary. They also committed to making Cameroon ungovernable in the very near future, making bold on announcing that special operatives had made their way into Cameroon to commence with the resistance. Innocent, Ambazonia Calling.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Welcome, Professor Tatamenta, to The Devil Unmasked.
Thanks for your welcome, Ntumfoyn, and let us jointly unmask the meaning of crocodile tears from the domestic and international communities over the ongoing genocide in Ambazonia.
The carnage in Ambazonia continued to rear its ugly head. What assessment has the international community done of the impact of this war on our people?
Ntumfoyn, as you very well know, the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights in March, that is last year, 2018, is reported to have identified long-standing structural discrimination in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, leading to continuing clashes between security forces and separatist groups. Since then, the government of the Satanic Republic of Cameroon has refused to take steps to reduce violent confrontation, address historic inequality, respect and ensure the rights of people, promoting equal rights and protesting violations, and provide humanitarian assistance to victims of the conflict. Cameroon even refused to allow the High Commissioner to visit Ambazonia to assess the crisis at ground zero.
As we know, the devil has shut the door on the United Nations and prevented them from coming in. What does the UN now say is going on in Ambazonia.
The consequences, Ntumfoyn, of the ongoing genocide as reported by the United Nations itself include summary executions of unarmed Amazonian civilians by Cameroon police, gendarmes, and military forces, abductions in Nigeria and illegal deportation to Cameroon of 47 Amazonian community leaders, 33,000 students as of June last year, that is 2018, unable to attend school because of abductions, rape, attacks, destruction of schools, and safety issues by security forces. As you know, at least 40 schools have been burnt down. Mass arrests and arbitrary detentions and the use of torture and excessive force by security personnel, leading to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, killing and excessive use of force, burning down of villages and houses, arbitrary detention and torture by government forces. More than 600,000 internally displaced by the violence and reportedly killing in forests and lying down in bushes as well.
Has there been a change in the situation ever since this report you were referencing was released?
Since these reports were published, the situation has instead worsened, with intensified fighting, paralysis of economic activities in the affected zones, and the number of displaced persons has swollen up to more than 680,000. The government of Cameroon has blatantly refused to promote the recommended inclusive dialogue, allow access to UN personnel to assess the situation, or to provide humanitarian assistance directly to those affected. Rather, the Satanic Republic of Lucifer Biya has been toting his begging bowl around the world, borrowing war weapons for the extermination of Amazonians.
Are you confirming that weapons acquired through such an international beg campaign have been used to further the extermination of Ambazonians?
Without any hesitation, Ntumfoyn, I say yes. According to the International Criminal Court referral report released recently, Northern Zone Colonial Governor Lele Lafrique Chofo Adolf Hitler personally presides over an immense system that has massacred 2,600, scorched more than 80 communities, roasted people with chemical weapons, burnt down farms and food markets to use starvation as a war weapon, and rendered more than 240,000 homeless in less than only 220 days.
Let me make sure our listeners hear this again. 220 days, 2,600 people massacred in the northern zone at the command of one governor alone. Over 80 communities scorched. What has been done to bring an end to such crimes against humanity?
Ntumfoyn, as you well know, it's been hypocrisy all the way. Crocodile tears running down the faces of onlookers. In fact, callous indifference and caressing the symptoms rather than seeking concrete solutions to the genocide. Consider what happened in September 2018, that last year. The High Commissioner of Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, identified instead the pressing need for humanitarian assistance of a large number of civilians and over 680,000 people forced to take refuge far from their homes. During the third Universal Periodic Review of Cameroon, many states expressed concerns about inequality and discrimination faced by English-speaking minority, recommending that Cameroon first adopt legislation to protect human rights defenders and journalists, 2. Provide transparent information on human rights in Cameroon, 3. Grant international agencies access to English-speaking separatist leaders extradited from Nigeria and detained incommunicado, investigate disappearances of political opposition representatives, including members of English-speaking minority, and ensure their safe return, finally respect and ensure citizens' rights to express their views about addressing the problems of English-speaking people. These are not solutions to genocide, Ntumfoyn, as you see. They are mere palliatives, bandaging the festering wound, as it were.
I'm trying to understand, but what exactly has Biya done to secure such callous indifference on the part of the international community?
Ntumfoyn, first of all, Lucifer Paul Biya doled out golden status to two influential and world leaders like the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Commonwealth Secretary General Baronet Patricia Scotland, worth $4 million to buy their silence and indifference over Biya's ongoing genocide in Ambazonia.
Now, that's the first point you're mentioning. I know there will be more, but I just wanted to say that this is the first time I'm hearing of the value of those golden statues, those golden gifts. $4 million, you just said. My goodness. So that was the first. Let me let you continue, Prof.
Secondly, Ntumfoyn, Lucifer Paul Biya has used the tactic of collective colonization and plunder of Ambazonia to ensure corporate capitalist sharks like US ExxonMobil, French Total, UK New Age Energy, and even China and Russia to join the looting of the rich and abundant natural resources of the Ambazonian people.
Why is the United Nations leading this cohort of countries away from addressing the root cause, which is recolonization, and getting them to focus on one of the symptoms, which is this humanitarian crisis?
Ntumfoyn, it may be amusing, but let me tell you, the Satanic Republic of Cameroon was elected as a permanent member of the United Nations Human Rights Council in October 2018. That was just last year. This act, Ntumfoyn, looked like awarding Adolf Hitler posthumously the Nobel Peace Prize for the annihilation of more than 6 million Jews. The Chinese government has offered support to Cameroon's internally displaced persons through the Biya regime worth 1.8 billion francs. UNICEF in May 2018, that was on the 27th, gave an assistance of $15.1 million for this assistance. The French have sent Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, who are serving as spies in Amazonian hospitals. And the UK, of all countries, has offered $15 million for children caught in the genocide. And Ntumfoyn, to me, these are really hypocritical, how do we call it, a kind of solutions to the problem, because they are seeing the symptoms, not the root causes of the problem.
This sounds like corruption on steroids, yet no one is getting punished or even called out for it.
Ntumfoyn, this is hypocrisy at its highest. This is shedding crocodile tears, I repeat. The failure of the international community to institute any kind of punishment on the government of the Satanic Republic of Cameroon for such war crimes, atrocity crimes, and crimes against humanity, backed by incredible evidence from organizations like Amnesty International, has instead emboldened Lucifer Paul Biya's gangster murderers. Hence, the genocidal regime has stopped all lame calls for inclusive dialogue by accelerating the crimes with impunity, with more targeted killings, burning, maiming, use of chemical weapons, abductions, and wanton arrests of innocent unarmed civilian combatants.
Sorry for cutting in, but what should the international community do now?
Ntumfoyn, let us revisit briefly what former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, now of blessed memory, presented on April 7, 2014. That was during the 10th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. The measures he recommended to prevent genocide were stated as follows. First of all, stop armed conflict, which usually provides the context for genocide. 2. Protect civilians in armed conflict, including through United Nations peacekeepers. 3. End impunity through judicial action in national and international courts. 4. Gather information and set up an early warning system. And finally, take swift and decisive action, including military action by the United Nations, to stop the carnage.
What should Ambazonians do?
Ntumfoyn, let me remind you that trusting Ambazonians have learned bitter lessons the hard way since 1961. They know more keenly than ever that the ongoing genocide is not a single event but a process that has evolved over time, and it required planning and resources to carry out systematically. As chilling as that sounds, it also means that with adequate information, mobilization, courage and political will, Ambazonians can fend off further genocide and kick the rampaging demons out of their homeland.
Oh, thank you very much, Prof, for coming in. This is all the time we've got for this edition. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for chatting with me, Ntumfoyn.
So get on now on the train. Everybody, get on now on the train. Mothers, fathers, get on now on the train. Children, get on now on the train. Sister, brothers, get on now on the train. Husbands, wives too, get on now on the train.
I will continue to play my part to ask the people of Southern Cameroon to take their revolution into their hands and continue the fight to liberate themselves.
So restoration train is our freedom train.
The right to self-defense cannot be overemphasized, yet the beauty and the sheer effectiveness of nonviolence could not be stressed at a better time than today, a day before the anniversary of the Martin Luther King birthday. Ambazonia Calling would like all to reconsider the moral and the ethical questions involved. Is there a political cause for which killing people can be justified as an adequate or acceptable cost to pay? For over a year now, the cost is already being paid in Ambazonia. So the better question to ask is if violence works. That will be the focus of a series we're going to be producing over the next few weeks, but we're beginning right away with Delano Mukom.
There is no easy answer to the question you ask. How does the people with their backs to the wall, a people who are being massacred on a daily basis, hold out, avoid violence of any kind, and stick with non-violent approaches? That, as Shakespeare's Hamlet would argue, is the question. To help us answer that question, let me invite you to listen to Paul Newman, the director of the International Center for the Study of Radicalization.
If we're just purely looking at whether violence works or not, we will find that more often than not, violence actually makes the situation worse than better.
The evidence, according to experts on radicalization, and this is contrary to popular belief, violence works against, not in favor of a movement like Ambazonia's quest for recognition. The more violence, the less popular support a movement gets, according to Paul Newman.
People who use violence believe that violence actually has a mobilizing effect. That if people see acts of terrorism, for example, being carried out, that they believe that the revolution is coming, the movement is strong, that now is the moment to join the revolution. In reality, of course, violence does not mobilize people. In fact, it divides movements. It actually creates the disintegration of movements. And quite often, it actually puts people off joining movements. It triggers the division of the opposition between moderates and extremists. So rather than assuming that violence mobilizes people and makes more people join the movement, more often than not, it actually has the opposite effect.
What the last 1 year has proven is something that was feared before this movement turned violent. It is the fact that the colonizers do not intend to go quietly into the night. This is how Paul Newman explains this phenomenon.
Another assumption by people who are using violence is that governments are paper tigers and that they can easily be brought down if you're only using the right acts of violence, if you're only manipulating the situation through a few acts of symbolic terrorism or whatever kind of violence you're using. The reality is that this kind of assumption is based on almost ideal conditions. Ideal conditions in which you have a foreign occupation, population is behind the insurgents, the commitment of the colonial power of the foreign occupier is weak, the government can be brought down easily. In most situations, that's actually not the case. Governments will not give in easily to violence. So what you end up is a situation in which violence is not only not bringing the government to give in, it's actually destroying your own movement. That's what happens in most cases. Not in all cases, not always completely useless, but in most cases, non-violent forms of resistance have actually been proven to be more effective than violent methods of resistance.
The direct effect is that the millions of Ambazonians who signed up to a nonviolent campaign tend to step away when the movement turns violent or re-embraces violence. Bottom line is that success of Ambazonia will come from nonviolent, legal, and diplomatic battles. Exactly the battle the colonialists do not want to engage because they know they will never win. These are the battles Ambazonians must prepare to have once the guns go silent and a safe window opens for mass, peaceful mobilization. It is Ambazonia's winning strategy. This is Delano Mukong for Ambazonia Calling.
Stay tuned. Ambazonia Calling will be right back with more news, analysis, commentary, opinion, and editorials. There was a time not so long ago when most Ambazonian organizations believed in and preached the gospel of the force of argument, not the argument of force. Only 2 short years ago, the majority of our movements only swore in the name of nonviolence, begging the question, what happened? This is the question we posed to Tanyi Jude Agwa Ozugen.
There was indeed a time when Ambazonians chanted NGOKETUNJIA, a time when our people embraced nonviolence and defied a brutal regime.
I admire freedom fighters wherever they are, but I still believe that nonviolence is the strongest approach. So I don't think it's limited to a particular locality. I think it should apply in every situation in the world where individuals seek to break loose from the bondage of colonialism or from some totalitarian regime.
How times have changed. Violence is now norm than it is the exception.
Okay, the child died. They have carried the corpse from the hospital. That's it. They're doing the march past. We're going to Commercial Avenue right now. That's the corpse, as you can all see. That's the corpse. And this is not fun anymore. Pamela is turning to something else.
As expected by scholars in this area, the numbers actively involved with our restoration quest has dwindled. Times were when our people held major capitals around the world spellbound, listening to our story at rallies attended by mammoth crowds. The crowds, which poured into streets across Ambazonia on September 22nd and October 1st, 2017, will be impossible to mobilize until we return our restoration quest to nonviolence. The temptation is that the majority of Ambazonians listening to this edition of Ambazonia Calling will not hesitate to call us agents of the colonizer. It will not be a surprise. In this day, and for the same reason, Martin Luther King Jr. told reporters of how his nonviolence doctrine led to him being accused of being in the pocket of the oppressors.
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolence. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs.
Truth is that guns will go silent at some point, soon. The UN Security Council has already demanded an end to the violence. When the violence ends, campaigners for Ambazonia's independence will still have to accept savagery at the hands of the oppressors.
Be in jail. When they put Ralph and then Wyatt in jail, let them know that they got 100 more to put in jail. When they put that next 100 in jail, let them know that they got another 1,000 to put in jail. When they put that 1,000 in jail, let them know that they got 10,000 more to put in jail.
No success will come from growing acts of violence, nor from riots, as Martin Luther King also argued.
I don't see the answer to our problem in riots. So my slogan is not burn, baby, burn. My slogan is build, baby, build. Organize, baby, organize.
Martin Luther King Jr. warns it will never be easy.
Young Petit Frere. Petit Frere stand for their door. They shoot it for their door. For their door.
Despite the pain, Non-violence remains far more effective. King even calls on the oppressed to show no hatred to their oppressors.
They understand that one of the first principles of nonviolence is a willingness to be the recipient of violence while never inflicting violence upon another.
He preaches love that was so powerful to the extent that he was willing to give up his life to set brother and sister free. King did not only preach nonviolence, he proved that it works. Today is Ambazonia's day to prove the same. This is Tanya Jude Agua Ozugen for Ambazonia Calling.
We must emphasize that at Ambazonia Calling, we fully support and understand the right to self-defense and know that that right is being exercised now in the face of a war that Mr. Biya has declared against Ambazonia. Notwithstanding, we know that the guns will go silent at one point. We don't want our people numbed by the violence. We don't want our people withdrawn. We don't want our people resigned. As soon as the window opens for peaceful demonstrations, we want to demonstrate to the world that Ambazonia wants exactly what we've been demanding for, which is full, unconditional independence. We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Nyamfuka of the week. We've got the kings and queens of foolish for this week, and here to present them, Veronique Vetumfe.
Two factions, each claiming to have powers, are circulating invitations to two different conclaves in February. How much easier would it have been had this confusion not been allowed to prevail? How much easier would it have been to know that any group claiming such powers obtained it through elections? The two conclaves say it all. The unresolved question of legitimacy prevents Ambazonia from becoming a real contender for recognition. The countries and organizations that would eventually be called to recognize Ambazonia need an authority to talk to that not only claims but has the powers from the people and represent the will of the people as expressed in free and fair elections. For failing to see beyond the selfish need of quenching their thirst for power, for insisting on hanging on like a drowning man, even to a snake, for preferring any trappings of power, the two factions of the self-proclaimed interim government group, who are convening two different conclaves next month, are this week's third place finishers for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Finishing in the position of runners-up this week are the armed groups on Ground Zero, who have resorted to gruesome acts of torture on soldiers taken prisoners of war, as well as civilians targeted for either going to work or for engaging in crimes. This week, we saw a video from one of the groups torturing a soldier stripped naked, and we saw another video showing many civilians with their fingers chopped off. Those involved with these acts are the shameful crown princes of Nyamfuka. God had a plan for each finger on our hand. One of those fingers chopped off could have been created to bring a grand piano or guitar alive with music. Who are we, common humans, to interfere with God's mission or take parts of a human being? Those who are committing the war crimes of torturing prisoners of war, those committing the crimes against humanity of chopping off fingers are this week's second place finishers for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Anyone following Ambazonia in the media would have read the article this week on Jakiri, in which the author and journalist tried to hide behind anonymous sources to pass a message on behalf of the colonizer. You may have read the story about people in Jakiri, in Bui State, claiming that Amba boys are not only worse than colonial forces. The journalist even claims to have found people in Jakiri who agreed with Monster President Paul Biya by calling Ambazonia Restoration Forces terrorists. That is the mask that journalist Ellie Smith, a supporter of Cardinal Tumi's AGC, found this week to try and cover up for the gang raping of a breastfeeding mother by well-known Cameroonian terrorist forces in Jakiri. For trying so hard in this article not to recognize that they are true Amba boys, only focused on the independence fight. For failing to recognize that they are also fake Amba boys set up by Atanganji to commit atrocities. For failing to recognize that they are criminals who are taking advantage of the situation to commit crimes in addition to Biya's forces, which are just criminal. Journalist Ellie Smith is this week's winner of the Crown of Shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is Veronique Vetimfe for Ambazonia Calling.
Nyamfuka them all.
Someone did some great work this week that might clear up the reputation of people like Senator Penn and Mancho BBC at Nkonenge prison. Last week, as you will remember, there were accusations peddled in audio and video messages on the internet suggesting that they had swindled resources meant for themselves and for their prison mates. Well, here's an excerpt that probably will help with the reputation of these few good men and heroes that are in prison.
So I will decide for make my own personal investigation. And in short, what I will tell una Ambazonia na see, parents don't challenge the acting interim government to step up and tell we Ambazonian them, who amongst them don't send any other money, apart from the money we came Leo, Cometa, Elvis, and Rachel for HSS, they send for ye with specific instructions on how to use the money, and parents be tell them how he be use the money, give them detailed report how he be use the money.
The wrecking of people's reputation, which happened in this incident in prison, which we just referenced, is also happening outside of prison, of course. And it's part of the wrangling and power-mongering that's going on, that's causing so much confusion in the struggle. It is the focus of this paper by Willie Brotade.
For more than half a century, the people of the former southern Cameroons complained about all the things that they lost by getting into the ill-fated union with La République du Cameroun. Our Jeremiads gave observers the impression that if afforded the opportunity, we will prove to the Cameroonese and the rest of the world how different, how democratic, tolerant, honest, selfless, and organized we are. Alas, the events of the last 2 years since this Ambazonian intifada started have given the lie to such claims. We have become like crabs in a bucket, doing everything to pull down each other, whereas we should be working together to get out of the bucket. We have resorted to hurling insults at each other, demonizing those who challenge us, and ostracizing those we can't control. This crab mentality has taken root in our collective psyche, and it must be eradicated now. Perhaps a look at how a good musical performance by a choir or a band or an orchestra is put together will help our people understand the importance of working together. In order to produce music that is pleasing to the ears, there has to be harmony between the parts. All the singers or musicians read from the same sheet of music and do what is required of their part so that the final product is the beautiful melody that the audience appreciates. In our case, the sheet of music should be the liberation and international recognition of Ambazonia. The musicians are the leaders of the various liberation groups that were supposedly formed for this purpose. Unfortunately, egotistical discordance has led to a very distressing cacophony instead of the harmony we expected when SCACUF was created in February 2017. After 2 years of wandering in the wilderness of cluelessness, it is time for us to rethink our strategy. We should adopt a platform that projects our strongest arguments based on the constitutionality and legality of our cause, even while exercising our right to defend ourselves against the terrorist army of Cameroon. It is time for us to remind the UN to enforce resolutions 1541 and 1608 in particular, so that Ambazonia can take her seat at the table. We should embark on a diplomatic blitz with a view to bringing an end to the massacre of our people, the ghost towns, and most importantly, ensure a resumption of school, because even half-baked education is better than no education at all. As this revolution enters its third year, we should be working on strategies that would alleviate the pain and suffering that our people are going through. As such, instead of grandstanding, as some of our people are wont to do, the leaders have to recognize that every liberation group has expertise of some kind, and therefore, those with better expertise in a given area should lead the effort as the circumstances dictate. That is the kind of collaboration we need to see if they are truly working to free Ambazonia. The time for massaging people's ego is over. Let's put Ambazonia first. To use the musical metaphor, we need to see these leaders singing from the same sheet of music like these beautiful voices singing the Ambazonian anthem. This is Willibrod Ade for Ambazonia Calling.
Glory to the Father for making a nation and joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom, we shall live in place and means in our leadings, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God be the watchman of His nation. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in place and peace in our leadings, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God be the watchman of His nation.
Beautiful voices there with yet another glorious version and rendition of the Ambazonian anthem. We've got one more story here in the line of people dragging others down in this revolution, and it comes to us from Sylvester Makia, alias Shidongluk. He is on his first assignment on Ambazonia Calling, and here to deliver the paper in studio is the monk from Ibali Kumato.
Some food for thought as we all enter the dog-eat-dog phase of our revolution. In 1964, just 3 years into our experiment in cohabitation, the learned Professor Bernard Fonlan scripted a secret memo to powerful President Amadou Ahidjo about his vision. The prof said that a busy wall gecko stops from time to time to survey its surroundings, The busy merchant closes shop occasionally to take stock. Machine operators stop once in a while to overhaul and oil the moving parts, and a traveler on a long journey stops from time to time to assess the ground covered and the distance that lies ahead. He felt that it would be prudent to pause and take stock of how coexistence was progressing. The professor was royally ignored. And here we find ourselves on the journey. Our gallant fighters are honorably defending themselves and their beloved families from soldiers that invade their privacy with impunity and carry out atrocities too awful to describe. While this is going on, other fighters, equally gallant, train their weapons on fellow citizens instead of the marauding invaders. Someone said it is a curse from the Almighty. Perhaps. Others fight with their mouths, vilifying this or that citizen as their fancies carry them. An interesting war cry consists of calling out and denouncing those who do not belong to Ambazonia. J.N. Foncha was a mere Chang man, uprooted and planted in Quen. Inoni Ephraim Okafor is nothing but a Nigerian. Milan Atam has no base in Ambazonia. He is also a Chang man. And so on and so on. Other than the bare name, not much is said about the contribution of the individual so targeted for stigmatization. Well, how about this? Barack Obama traces his origin from a Luo father in Kenya, East Africa. He too was subjected to slurs of the most vicious type in America. Yet, thanks to Barack Obama as President and Commander-in-Chief of U.S. forces, America's greatest nightmare of the 21st century, Osama bin Laden, was put out of action, the Cameroonese equivalent of neutralized. That was not all. Obamacare put an end to 40 years of health care tribulation. Obama ended 50 years of meaningless diplomatic isolation of Cuba, bringing a breath of fresh air to many divided families. Perhaps Obama is too exotic. How about nearer home then? Does Paul Sinju, Paul Bamileke, ring a bell in any ears? Paul was a Tico transplant from Bamileke land, whose devotion, hard work, and citizen activism earned him the votes of the Tico population. Paul left an unchallenged record of service and devotion as Tico mayor. Does the name Nana Fabu ring a bell? That was J.N. Foncha's finance minister from across the Mongo Divide. So also was Gigi Dibue of Health, E.K. Mensah from Ghana of the Judiciary Department. And as recent as 2002, there was at least a West Indian serving in BOYO's High Court. What is the difference between an Ambazonian with nothing to contribute and an alien who helps score a goal? Finally, it is not true that all of us came from somewhere else. Some have traced their origins to the west and others to the east of the River Mongo. Mine goes back as far as Adamawa in Nigeria. There are some who swear to be origins of the Olduvai Gorge in East Africa. Others go as far back as the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a fertile land called the Garden of Eden in Iraq, formerly Mesopotamia. How about judging fellow citizens by their works rather than just their names? This is Sylvester Makia, alias Sidon Luke, read in the studio by the monk for Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people, sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in Boya. This week, the International Criminal Court at The Hague handed down a ruling in the case Laurent Gbagbo versus Côte d'Ivoire, and the court essentially decided that Laurent Gbagbo should be set free. Should Africans be revolted by what just happened? Here is Barrister C. Ajimve Ambe.
The International Criminal Court's recent ruling acquitting former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo of several counts of crimes against humanity, murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, persecution, and other inhuman acts sent ripples of mixed feelings around the world. The fundamental question is, should we jubilate or be revolted that Laurent Gbagbo, whose freedom was taken away for a considerably long time through the complicity of France, the United Nations, the African Union, and the ICC, has now been found not guilty by the same ICC? Just as some would say of their love lives, it's complicated. Even after this acquittal, how does the ICC repair the very founded perception that it is working for superpowers like France, Britain, the United States, and against smaller nations in Africa and other parts of the world? Isn't it astounding that the crimes being committed in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East are invisible to the ICC, just as are the crimes being committed by Mr. Biya in Ambazonia? Isn't it unbelievable that Gambia's Yaya Jammeh is having a glorious retirement in Equatorial Guinea, unperturbed by the ICC, despite the despicable crimes he and his regime committed? Isn't it preposterous that the French have not been held accountable for the crimes committed in Rwanda, that no one is being held accountable for the crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Isn't it hypocritical that while scapegoats like Laurent Gbagbo are dragged through the system, the ICC and the superpowers that it actually works for look the other way while Mr. Biya slaughters Ambazonians? It is after all no secret that the hauling of Gbagbo to the ICC had the fingerprints of neo-colonialist imperialist France written all over it, and that it was certainly not out of an abundance of love for the people of Ivory Coast, but rather because Gbagbo dared to challenge big bad wolf France by holding on to his electoral victory rather than sheepishly ceding power to France's enfant chéri, Alassane Ouattara. Nevertheless, as bleak as all of this looks, there is still a glimmer of hope. The ICC's acquittal of Laurent Gbagbo ignites hope in the independence and impartiality of the ICC judges and demonstrates that justice might still stand a chance even against the mighty complicity of neo-colonialist imperialist France, the United Nations, as well as betrayal by the African Union. Ambazonians must therefore remain hopeful that justice shall also be served in the case of Mr. Paul Biya of the Republic of Cameroon, hopeful that the ICC shall find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for the numerous war crimes, crimes against humanity, murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, and most of all, genocide committed against the people of Ambazonia. The lingering question, however, in the minds of many Ambazonians remains, now that hope has been ignited, how soon shall Mr. Biya be hauled to the ICC to face Lady Justice and receive the ruling he deserves? Regrettably, as egregious as his crimes are, dragging Mr. Biya to the ICC might not be as effortless a process as was dragging Mr. Gbagbo to the same court. Unlike Ivory Coast, Cameroon is not signatory to the Rome Statute, the underlying legal instrument that established the ICC, and is therefore not directly subject to the jurisdiction of the ICC. However, hope is not lost. In fact, hope cannot be lost. This simply means that the path of Mr. Biya and his demonic accomplices to the ICC would most likely not be a straight and direct path. It would have to be through recommendation of the UN Security Council or through the sponsorship of a signatory to the Rome Statute, a member state of the ICC. As complicated as this might sound, this is certainly not an impossibility, provided that Ambazonians persist in their awareness campaigns and diplomatic efforts to ensure that necessary allies and coalitions are built that can facilitate or champion the process on their behalf. It can also not be emphasized enough that in order to build a strong case, an accurate factual record is absolutely invaluable. Ambazonians must therefore continue to document every single atrocity, every human rights abuse and act of genocide committed by the BIA regime. If the ICC stays on its pleasantly surprising path of seeming independence and impartiality, and with a robust factual record of gross human rights abuses, war crimes, and genocide, chances are justice shall be served in the case of Mr. BIA through a resounding conviction, as it was served in the case of Mr. Gbagbo through a resounding acquittal. This is C. Ajimbo Ambe for Ambazonia Calling.
We must go and use every forum that we have to remind the world that the people of Ambazonia are being massacred and slaughtered on a daily basis, and the time has come for the world to rise, and that the world must now begin to speak about the question of Ambazonia and their right to self-determination.
There are two Cameroons that came together. If you are telling us that what happened in Cameroon is like dropping a few cubes of sugar into a basin of water, who is the sugar and who is the water?
Doubting Thomases who think that this is a battle which will be concluded through military action will discover to their shock and chagrin at once that it will not happen.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Our next commentary is coming from someone whom Ambazonians don't listen to very much. But this week, he is drawing comparisons between the American War of Independence and the Ambazonian War of Independence, as we should rightly call it. I would let him introduce himself.
My name is Jeff McCoy. I'm one of the producers of the Ambazonia Calling Show. It has been my privilege and honor to work with such a staff of dedicated producers, reporters, and technicians that this show has. Weekly, photos and videos and stories are filed that show the true horrors of the war in Ambazonia. Government forces have attacked unarmed women and children. Rape, torture, and death are their stock in trade. But the Amazonian people are a proud and determined people. They will face that end with fire in their eyes and work for peace in their land. The young fighters that I've seen are the bravest soldiers today. Sometimes fighting without shoes or even enough rifles, they engage their occupiers and recover the rifle that their brother just held before his death and use that to bring the fight to their enemy. I see such resemblance between these Amba boys and the forefathers of my country, the United States of America. You see, just like the fighters that defended their homes and families in Ambazonia with a prayer for independence and self-rule, the Continental Army of the 1770s, and the land that would become the USA, men and women answered their call for freedom. Led by George Washington, a man that suffered major defeats in the French and Indian War, and overseeing an army of untrained ragtag fighters with low or sometimes no supplies, my country was born. When it seemed impossible, almost laughable, that this group of people could even consider going up against the most highly trained and financed army in the world and think for a minute that they could carve out their own government, they did just that. Slowly and with great determination and sacrifice, Washington and his army began to see some success. It was just in time, too, because the new Continental Congress had committed their very lives to a declaration that would guarantee their hanging if the British won. After several losses, and when it seemed the Continental Army was finished, British General Cornwallis planned on a decisive victory in the morning and a quick return back to England after trapping his enemy against the Delaware River. However, during the night, Washington moved his entire army from certain defeat. Not only that, he attacked and captured Princeton, and then immediately went on the move to Morristown. That forced the British to race to New Brunswick, New Jersey to protect their supplies and money, and the Continental Army was still alive to fight again and eventually win independence for a new nation. Washington's men were undersupplied. Many marched in the snow without shoes. Many died for fighting for something that was so important that they considered a small, worthwhile sacrifice. So it is with the Amba boys and the people of Ambazonia, fighting against all odds, struggling with leadership and undersupplied. I can only imagine that it would be discouraging. It may even seem hopeless. But I can assure you that just like the beginnings of the United States of America, victory and independence can be won. It takes leadership, dedicated and united leadership. It takes recognizing and following the Geneva Convention. It takes not only bringing the fight to the enemy on the battlefield, but also taking your cause to the U.S. Congress, the United Nations, and every other civilized nation in the world. So, Amba boys, remember, the eyes of the world are upon you. And for you families that have suffered such loss, many of you have lost your home, your land, and even the lives of your loved ones. Just know this: we are working hard to report your story to the world. So stay Amba strong. This is Jeff McCoy, Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Because you have your army of occupation out in West Cameroon, you believe that when the people will rise, even if you took the whole of the French army and added to yours, you will never bring them down.
And I call on all Cameroon soldiers to lay down their arms within Ambazonia and to turn their arms against the very system that has made them slaves in the land of their birth.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, compassfreepress.com, and africafreedomnetwork.com.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, well, something came up as I was getting ready to write my letter to you. I was going to reply to the nonsense you wrote to me last week, the threats about neutralizing people, about rolling in with heavier machinery to kill as many Ambazonians as possible. Just those threats and empty words and promises that you make that you cannot keep, whether it is about tarring the ring road or it is about getting ready for a soccer tournament. So I was going to write you a letter just to let you know how revolted I was by you even thinking about trying to threaten any Ambazonian with this kind of nonsense. Well, it happens that there's better fish to fry. So I want your service, Joshua. You remember the guy who said from the United Nations that he's going to put his good officers at your service. He's going to cover up for any crimes you commit. Oh, the guy called Antonio Guterres. I've got a letter for him. I've got this next note. Could you please transmit to him? For once you can be useful as a messenger. Mr. Secretary General, I could not bring myself to write to you either because, just thinking about it, the more urgent complaint I need to table right now is one against you, not some letter. And I want a public complaint. So this is one that I'm putting out to my fellow brothers and sisters of Ambazonia so they can generally transmit to the people of the United Nations around the world. The call is for you to quit, Mr. Secretary General, and to take Joshua with you wherever you go. Birds of the same feather. Fellow Ambazonians, if ever you were in doubt, if there was still any lingering doubts in your mind as to the devilish role that is being played by the Secretary General of the United Nations, I want you to take all of that doubt out of your mind right now. A journalist raised a specific question to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he did his usual blah, blah, blah. And he mentioned a word that we saw in that report back to Mr. Biya, using good offices for the purposes of covering up on behalf of the regime. The journalist's question was very precise. Here's the question.
A request for a clarification. Would you consider taking proactive action to recommend an independent, transparent international investigation in such areas as Cameroon, the murdered Saudi journalists, etc.? That's the clarification question.
So a journalist asking the Secretary General of the United Nations if they will put in place an independent international commission of inquiry into Cameroon, and the man has plenty of blah, blah, blah. Just usual, Antonio Guterres.
No, in relation to the first questions, we have been actively engaged with good offices in several of the situations are very different from case to case, but in those that have a dimension of conflict, we have been quite strongly engaged in good offices to try to alleviate the situation. Concretely, in relation to Cameroon, I have spoken, I don't know, probably more than 6 times with the President of Cameroon. Our people on the ground has been working actively to try to de-escalate the tension in the country.
Blah, blah, blah. This is the person who has excelled in the diplomacy of indifference, the reason why our people are in the trouble they are in. This is the fellow who said that his diplomacy consists of saying nothing, especially when he's speaking. Now he just proved it to us again.
Would you consider taking proactive action to recommend an independent, transparent international investigation in such areas as Cameroon, the murdered Saudi journalists, etc.? That's the clarification question.
No, in relation to the first questions, we have been actively engaged with good offices in several of the situations are very different from case to case, but in those that have a dimension of conflict, we have been quite strongly engaged in good offices to try to alleviate the situation. Concretely, in relation to Cameroon, I have spoken, I don't know, probably more than 6 times with the President of Cameroon. Our people on the ground has been working actively to try to de-escalate the tension in the country.
Blah, blah, blah. Given a chance to look back at Kofi Annan's career, Guterres recognized the true enemy of peace-loving people around the globe. It is, he says, indifference in the face of suffering by millions.
To him, indifference was the world's worst poison.
Antonio Guterres, saying nothing, especially when you're speaking.
There is an old joke. The art of diplomacy is to say nothing, especially when you are speaking.
Indeed, maintaining criminal silence. It's a shame, Mr. Secretary General. Thousands and thousands of Ambazonians are being massacred, and Mr. Secretary General is eating his tongue in front of the press, unable to answer a simple question.
Would you consider taking proactive action to recommend an independent, transparent international investigation in such areas as Cameroon?
We have been actively engaged with good offices in several of the situations are very different from case to case, but in those that have a dimension of conflict, we have been quite strongly engaged in good offices to try to alleviate the situation.
Kofi Annan worked extremely hard to put in place an instrument that Antonio Guterres, if he was truly serious about preventing genocide, would have used to intervene in the Cameroons.
Now, all of us who worked in that period were really shattered by the experience, and that's why I pushed for the approval of responsibility to protect, because that concept of responsibility to protect, which states that if a country is not in a position or unwilling to protect its population, the international community has a responsibility to go in, because before then, you can say this is a question of sovereignty. We have not been invited.
You have to be a disgrace to consider that picking up a phone and calling 6 times is concrete action while people are being slaughtered.
Concretely, in relation to Cameroon, I have spoken, I don't know, probably more than 6 times with the President of Cameroon.
Speaking 6 times with Mr. Biya doesn't change a thing in people's lives, Mr. Secretary General. They're asking you for concrete action. You are a disgrace to international diplomacy and to the United Nations. You are a disgrace to all the commitments the world has made, either in the Charter or in the responsibility to protect. You should resign, Mr. Secretary General. You have been listening to Ambazonia Calling. We came to you from our studios here in Washington, D.C. Our producers today, Jeff McCoy, Logistics, Joe Costa, and Crystal Cunningham. Our music is from Ken Wanaku, the monk, from Balikumato Vazekov himself, from William Ford, an Amber music star of blessed memory, from Eric Matisse on the web at soundimage.org, and from Prince Ajua Alem of Ajam, Sonicatron, USA. Ambazonia Calling is a joint production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. You can find us on the web at missionstribune.com, at compassfreepress.com, and at africafreedomnetwork.com. Next Sunday is another date. Until then, keep the spirit, keep the faith, keep up the good fight for justice and independence for Ambazonia. Stay Amber strong.